Good evening, welcome to Simpson at 8. Fiji Airways Managing Director and CEO Andre Viljoen last Friday announced their financial results for the financial year 2019. The group posted 61.2 million profit before tax and passenger numbers grew to 1.7 million, despite competition posed by Qantas, a major shareholder in the airline, when it ran its own Sydney to Nadi services to Fiji. There has been much talk and debate about the loans taken by Fiji Airways to purchase new aircrafts and the setting up of the Waqavuka holdings to facilitate these purchases. These loans and operating costs that amount to around $38 million a month. At a press conference last week, Viljoen went to great lengths to explain the airline's decision. And given the amount of rhetoric and confusion and debate that has surrounded these events, I have decided to play much of his comments unedited on this show, so we may get to hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. We will start by hearing from Viljoen about how Fiji Airways has undertaken their aircraft acquisitions and how Waqavuka Holdings was set up, including its ownership and role.
An acquisition is either a purchase or it is a lease. A purchase is where we go to Boeing and Airbus and companies like leasing companies who buy aircraft from Boeing and Airbus, and we say we want to buy an aircraft. We put out what we call a request for information. We say this is the route we want to fly. What aircraft have you got that can do that mission? And they then do bids. They tell us these are the aircraft that we think are suitable, and we get all that information. From that, we then issue a request for proposal, but there's a step before that. Before we even start with this process, we look at our 10-year growth strategic plan. We invite consultants. There's Seabury and Skyworks who are specialists with this. We invite them in and they help us do what we call a clean sheet review. We take every route we're flying today, every market. We look at how they're performing. We have a look at how the other opportunities are there, whether we can use them. And from this clean sheet review, we then prepare what we call a business model review. We say, is our model still right? Are the routes that we're flying right? Are the markets we're flying served properly? Is there opportunity to do more? And all of this, in the end, delivers a fleet plan. And from that fleet plan, we determine whether we need to replace aircraft, modernize aircraft, or add aircraft. And from that full review, our board then says, yes, management, you can now go ahead and you can start a process to either purchase or lease an aircraft. And I'll talk more in a moment about how we actually do campaigns around it. Now, when you purchase an aircraft, you go to what we call the original equipment manufacturer. There are two that we work with, Boeing and Airbus. There's Embraer for smaller aircraft, there's the ATRs for the turboprops, but when we're talking the bigger fleet, it's Boeing and Airbus. We issue the RFI based on the business model and the strategic plan and identification we need an aircraft. They come back and tell us the aircraft that they think can do the mission. We then issue an RFI, they give us an offer, and we start then negotiating. When you finally decide you're going to buy the aircraft from the original equipment manufacturer, Boeing and Airbus, the first requirement is there's a catalogue price. That's the price that they advertise. The price that we pay is called the net flyaway price. And the difference between the two is the quality of your negotiation. The more discounts you get, the more credits you get, the lower your net flyaway price versus the catalogue price. So after all the negotiations, and we now have a net flyaway price for the aircraft, we have to start signing an order. And the order is normally a purchase agreement or a sale agreement. We call it a purchase, they call it a sale. We sign a sale agreement, and the requirement is that you have to pay 20% of the flyaway price by delivery date. Now, normally, aircraft are not available off a showroom floor. They're not manufactured and put on a showroom floor, firstly because the specification is unique to every airline. And secondly, in normal times, there's a long waiting list. There can be a delivery waiting list where you can order and wait for delivery of anything up to 2 to 3 years. So historically, it took 2 years to manufacture your aircraft. In that 2 years, you had to make progressive deposit payments, 20% by the time it's delivered, and it was broken up. First month you pay 5% of the 20%, and so you pay down. But 20% of a new aircraft, you've got to pay in advance of it being built. Very difficult to obtain finance because there's no asset to secure the finance, and you typically have to take it out of your own cash. And very few airlines have the cash to pay those deposits. So that's why very few airlines buy aircraft. It is the cheaper form of finance because there's no middle party called a leasing company renting it to you making a profit. So of course it's going to be cheaper. So the cheapest way of buying or acquiring an aircraft is purchasing, but you've got to pay 20% down. On delivery, you have to finance 80%. And there are very few banks in the world that will finance 80% of an aircraft. They're normally consortiums of banks. So Barclays Capital, Deutsche, these big banks will each take a share, and they'll form a consortium, and they'll finance the 80%. But in the last 10 years, there have been many airlines that have failed, and as a result, these banks now want some form of insurance, and they want a credit insurance. And Europe has a lot of credit insurance agencies, and so does the US. It's called EXIM in the US, and the European Credit Agencies in Europe. The ECAs will provide an insurance. Of course, there's a small fee for it, but they will then tell these banks that if Fiji Airways fails, they will stand good. So what happens is, we order the aircraft from Boeing or Airbus, we sign a purchase agreement, the sale agreement, 20% has to be paid of the price, the net flyaway price by the time we take delivery, and then we have to go find financing for 80%. And we run around to all the banks, we issue RFPs, they come and give us quotes, and in the end they want either ECA or EXIM guarantees. So here's what then happens. The ECAs or EXIM are saying if we're going to give the guarantee, we want to have good securitization of the aircraft, because the security for the loan of 80% is the aircraft. They then insist that we have to form a special purpose company. And this special purpose company temporarily will own the aircraft. A mortgage is passed over it. They appoint a security agent to manage it, and every month we pay the repayment of the loan to the special purpose company, who then pays it on to the bank. And that is Waqavuka. So Waqavuka is this special purpose company which is owned by a security agent on behalf of the ECAs and the banks and Fiji Airways. And once we make the last payment, all the ownership reverts back from Waqavuka to Fiji Airways. So all Waqavuka is a special purpose company for the securitization that the European Credit Agency want over the aircraft, whilst they guaranteeing the loans until they repaid. So buying is cheaper, but buying is complicated, because you have to pay down 20%, and at the same time, the 80% is very complicated, because you've got banks who form consortiums, and they in turn want insurance, which is the Export Credit Agency. There's a structure of securitization, and on the day of the last payment, ownership reverts back to the airline. And that is what we did with our 3 A330-200s. We bought them from Airbus. We paid down the 20% deposit. We borrowed 80% through a German consortium, Helaba and KfW, and the ECAs, the German and the British ECAs, gave the insurance, and we had to form a special purpose company, Waqavuka. We put ownership into there, and every month we pay Waqavuka, which then pays it on to the lenders, the banks, which are KfW and Hilaba, and on the last payment, ownership reverts back to Fiji Airways. And the security agent that manages Waqavuka is Deutsche Bank, independent bank, and everything's independent. And all of that's done because a mortgage is passed over the aircraft to secure the aircraft for the lenders and the ECA, the European Credit Agency, and once it's paid, it all comes back to us. That is buying an aircraft.
That was Fiji Airways CEO Andrew Viljoen explaining about how Fiji Airways makes aircraft acquisitions and how Waqavuka Holdings was set up. I will now play further unedited comments from Viljoen about the technicalities of leasing and purchasing an aircraft and why he believes we made a great deal with the purchases and leases we made.
If we lease an aircraft, a lease is a rental. It's called an operating lease. So the alternative to this is if we don't have the 20% deposit and we need an aircraft where you want 100% of the aircraft effectively financed, but not by us, by the person who owns it, we go out to the leasing companies. They're called lessors. There are 16 around, 4 or 5 big ones. We put out an RFP. So when we acquire aircraft, we put it to Boeing and Airbus, which we call the original equipment manufacturers, to purchase, and at the same time you put an RFP to the lessors, and you say, this is the aircraft we need. They will come and they'll do offers, official bids, and they will then offer that they will rent you the aircraft instead of you buying the aircraft. They pay the 20% deposit to Boeing and Airbus. They borrow the 80% through their own sources, and all we do is pay a monthly rental. Now, both the purchase agreement and the banks that finance a purchase, and also the leasing agreements, which is the rental agreements, are not one-year agreements. They either 10 or 12 years. They are very onerous agreements because nobody is going to go and build an aircraft for you, finance it where it's your specification, and you can just hand it back when you choose to. These agreements have a lot of what we call events of default clauses. If you miss a payment, you put on notice. You have a remedy period. If you don't remedy it, they come take it back. So your banks repossess it, and they do that through Waqavuka and that security process, and the leasing company pitches up and fetches the aircraft because you're renting it, you don't own it. So what happens is, when they repossess an aircraft like that, all the future payments, whether it's the loan repayments or it's the rental payments, become due and payable the next morning, plus interest. And they sue you for it. But here's the difficult part. All these agreements have in them what they call cross-default clauses. If you fail in one, they all fail. So if you miss a payment on one, and they give you notice, you're in breach with all your loan agreements, all your lease agreements with every aircraft. So the risk and the impact for the business of just not paying is massive. And handing back, there's no such thing. Because these aircraft that are rented, now I talk about how rentals work. So we put out an RFP to the lessors. They come along and they offer us aircraft. We eventually choose one. We negotiate the rental. The rental is a factor of what they paid for the aircraft, the net flyaway price. It's a factor of market interest rates at the time, and it's a factor of the profit they make called the lease rate factor. We negotiate hard. We get a price. We agree a rental. You're locked in for 12 years, and that's the rental that you then have. Now, in addition to the rental, there are return conditions. At the end of 12 years, when they come and they fetch the aircraft, because you don't own it, you hand it back, They want the aircraft in a certain condition. And normally these rental agreements have half-life conditions. When you hand them back, they want engines with half-life left, the undercarriage with half-life, all the components with half-life, and if it's a bad agreement, it could be 100%, almost new, and if it's a good agreement, you get lower than half price, half-life. So to protect themselves, the leasing companies, in addition to the monthly rental, want a monthly payment of reserves, landing gear reserves, engine reserves, APU reserves. All these reserves are the cash they build up for when you have to do that half-life conditioning or repairs in between. Because an engine and an APU and a landing gear have a lifespan. And during that lifespan, once it reaches the end of the lifespan, you've got to overhaul it and zero life it. In other words, it gets a new life. And that cost, if it's on a leased aircraft, they hold the money, the leasing companies, because you pay it every month to them. And then when you do it, you use it. Now, if you hand back an aircraft, in addition to all the lease rentals they're going to sue you for all the conditions on it. They want everything at half-life, and you haven't met that. So it's a major issue to do that. So that's how purchase versus lease works. Now, how does Fiji Airways go about acquiring a purchased or a leased aircraft? I mentioned we do a full business model review. We do a full clean sheet review. We update our 10-year strategic plan, and we then make the decision, and we go out and we follow a process. And we've developed a very special process, a process where we're very, very rigid, very transparent, very robust. We enter a campaign. We issue the RFI, then followed by an RFP to Boeing, Airbus, and all the leasing companies. And they give us offers. We appoint an independent third-party specialist aviation consultancy firm to sit with us every step of the way, to examine all the offers, to analyze them, to tell us whether they're good or bad, what they've seen in the rest of the world, and guide us. But we do the work. They just analyze and guide. They have specialist tools, and they walk with us every step of the way. As we go along, we negotiate. We ask for more offers. We ask for more offers. We at some stage get what's called a BAFO, the best and final offer. And we have this consultancy telling us whether that BAFO is good or bad. You've got a catalogue price, you're negotiating down to a flyaway price, you've got a lease they've offered you, a lease monthly rental, and we get specialists to advise us good or bad, and whether there's more we can get. And we go through a very robust campaign. The one on the Maxes lasted a year, and the one on the 238 A350s 2 years. 2 years of grinding away to get the best deal for the company. In the end, we end up what's called the LAFO, the last and final offer. Now, we've got a technique of getting a very last LAFO. We bring them all down to Nandi. We go to the Sofitel. We make all of them come to the Sofitel for a week, and we do negotiations. And when we're busy with the one, the others are all sitting outside waiting. And we create a huge level of competitive tension. Huge. You can imagine Airbus sitting there watching Boeing, saying, we're not going to lose, we're going to win. And all the leasing companies. And this competitive tension has helped Fiji Airways achieve 2 amazing landmark deals on the Maxes on the 350. We've made gains on these acquisitions because we've used a hybrid method. The hybrid method is we buy it as a purchase, but we don't pay the deposit. We get a leasing company to pay it. We buy it and sell it to them immediately. So at the factory, when we take delivery of the aircraft, we already sell it to the leasing company, then rent it back. And that's called a sale and lease back. And that hybrid allows us to make a gain, and we can be very competitive like that. We also know that the price they're getting is the best flyaway price, and they're not loading the price. And that is how we go about acquiring the aircraft. So we did an amazing deal with the Maxes, and the same with the two 350s. So much so that we're paying a monthly rental for our A350s equal to what we're paying on our A330. And they're not the same aircraft. One's new generation, the other has got more seats, more capacity. It's considered the most technologically advanced aircraft in the world, and I'm paying the same rate for that per month as I am on a 330. We're the only airline in the world that's doing that. An amazing deal. So that's how our aircraft transactions work.
In this third segment, Viljoen explains how they have tried to cope when the effects of COVID-19 hit the world and Fiji. In particular, the stop to international travel and the grounding of aircrafts, and why they had to turn to government to provide a guarantee of 455 million.
I want to talk about COVID-19. I explained earlier that what you've seen from our financial results from 19 is how we have an organization and a leadership with grit and resilience, with skill to really handle any challenge that comes our way. Well, COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented, but it's a challenge. And we are addressing this challenge with the same grit and skill, and the same persistence and the same determination. And we've broken it into two parts, our survive and our thrive. Our survive is about sustaining this business. Our survival is critical for the economy of this country, and we are a major contributor. We're the major contributor of foreign currency to the country. We brought in 65% of all arrivals the last few years into this country. We play a huge role in developing tourism. We spend the same amount annually that Tourism Fiji spends on marketing out in the world. We work closely with Fiji Airways to cooperate on it. We are the first encounter a tourist has with this country is Fiji Airways. We're the ambassador around the world. So our strategic value is beyond question. And sustaining this business became the first step in COVID-19. What do we need to do when 95% of our aircraft are grounded and parked? Our international flights are suspended because borders are closed, there's no traffic, and we've got no revenue. Revenue dropped to almost zero. And you've got monthly costs, which we call recurring costs, of 38 million. Those 5 million is aircraft ownership. These are monthly loan repayments and aircraft rentals. Our employees were 7.5 million, and all other costs 6 million. Now, is that abnormal? No, every airline in the world has the same situation. Every airline has an infrastructure to generate revenue. Now, you've seen the revenue we've generated in the past. Air New Zealand the same, Qantas the same, Emirates the same. You've got these expensive aircraft. They're expensive to everyone, they're capital intensive, and we've got the aircraft. We've made sure we've got the best deals on each aircraft. So we had this cost. What do? We started with our revenue, our opening cash balance. Our opening cash balance was the 60 million profit we made in 19. Together with other balances we had a total of about 150 million. 150 million when your costs are 38, you've got 3 months. So we took some immediate measures. The first thing is we said, what aircraft don't we need? Now, I forgot to mention earlier in our aircraft acquisition, when we were busy with our 2-year campaign to get the 350s, also the year before that the Maxes, those aircraft were part of our modernization program for fuel cost saving. The Max saves 15% fuel compared to the old 737s, and these Airbus 350s 25% fuel. Also, more modern, more efficient. We know every route. We know what makes money. Every single destination we fly makes what we call a positive contribution. In other words, covers its costs of flying. They all COC positive. So we know which routes make less profit and which make more profit. We have independent evaluations we do every year using world-class tools to compare how we do on a route with all our competitors. So we looked at it and said, well, none of the routes are basket case routes. They're all profitable routes. And if the market opens, we need to keep them. We need to be there. But we do have 2 aircraft that are temporary. We've been through every contract with every supplier to see how we could get cost reduced and deferrals. All non-essential projects were frozen. First step is I got rid of 8 expatriate executives. 79 executive or expatriate pilots were immediately returned. Their contracts were terminated. And all the other staff, we started with 4 weeks leave without pay for April and May. And we said we would have to assess the situation, and if the grounding of our fleet continues beyond May, we may have to take further measures. Well, it did. So when we came to May and we realized we were already cancelling July and August and there's no work for people, we had to take the most unfortunate measure to terminate 50% of our employees. Now, I've been in this industry for 45 years. This is the first time in my history that something like this had to take place. It's sad, and obviously we are very, very conscious of the pain and hardship these people are suffering. But we had to do this for the survival of this business. This was survival measure, and we took that step. For the people that have remained, the executives work full-time, but have taken a 30% and 20% pay cut. All other employees have taken a permanent 20% pay cut, and those that are working are being paid for actual days worked. Some are working 2 days, some 3 days, some 4 days. And I can tell you that these steps we've taken, other airlines have taken more stringent and even larger steps. Air New Zealand have terminated 4,500 people. We know that Qantas is 5,000 odd and more to come. And we had no choice but to do this. So all the airlines that we talk to, even Emirates, which one can call the golden airline, with deep pockets and owning oil wells, have had to go and terminate staff. And they've terminated a lot of pilots as well. So our survival steps were, first thing in March, we said, wow, we don't know what's going to happen, how long is this going to last, let's immediately preserve cash, let's immediately take steps to reduce expatriates and start cutting costs and preserving cash. We then started with a major exercise to work on our cash forecasts. Because we said, well, it's not only going to be April and May, it could go way beyond April and May. Let's start looking ahead. And we started preparing cash forecasts. And I can assure you, we became cash forecasted out here. We must have done 300. We did forecasts for every month of 20, 21, 22. In fact, we have forecasts right up until the end of 2027. Every month, we did versions, best case, worst case. Why did we do all this? This was necessary because the steps we took to immediately reduce costs and preserve some cash would not be enough when you got 150 million in the bank and your costs are 38. You can just do the arithmetic yourself, your last 2-3 months. We did this to see what is that gap that we need to bolster cash with. And that's when we started speaking, obviously, to our shareholder, and every airline in the world has had to do the same. Because I, the other day, made a joke and said, when you go to your normal banks, they don't have a lot of appetite in these times to help. They have very strict credit rules. Those rules become a lot more complex and more onerous during difficult times. And so all airlines have had to turn to their governments, to their shareholders for support. And I can tell you, Lufthansa, for example, has received a 10 billion euro bailout from their government, and they don't even own a share. And we've seen the same with Finnair. Now, Air New Zealand is lucky their government has given them 900 million in cash and in credit support. And we then, very fortunately, and I cannot tell you enough how grateful we are to the government of Fiji for the 455 million of sovereign guarantees that has enabled us to obtain the type of financing to give us the cash to survive through COVID-19. So these cash flows became the way that we worked out what we need. So the first steps were preserve cash, take steps, cut costs, reduce the spend of cash, but that's not enough. We had to then say, what's the hole? What do we have to fill? How much do we bolster our cash by? And that's why we did all these cash flows. Using those cash flows, we then worked out the amount we need, working with our shareholder, and I can tell you, we tried to see every way we could get the cash, and in the end, in these circumstances, no banks come running, as I mentioned. We had to get shareholder support, and we're very grateful. And with that support, we've got loans that we put in place. We're busy with the last one, and we've managed to get payment deferrals. Now, a payment deferral, and this is what I was trying to explain the other day, a lease payment that we pay every month and a loan repayment that we pay through Waqavuka to get a 3-month, 6-month deferral and then have to pay it. That means by now we would have been paying them back and your normal payment. So I was saying, a loan is a noose and they can loosen it a bit and tighten it in a few months. You haven't achieved anything, it's worse. So the message I was trying to give is that a short-term deferral, which is easy to arrange, doesn't help you. You need to get a deferral where you pay back over a long period. And you cannot do that without a sovereign guarantee or some security that you have to put up. So we've managed, and I can tell you, I think we're the only airline, because that's what we've been told in the world, that has managed to get 9 and 12 month rental deferrals and payment deferrals on loans, and we pay it back over 6 years. And that would not have been possible without these government guarantees. Also, the loans we've arranged in that 455 million, we've got one loan of 6 years to repay, and the others are 10 and 15 years. Again, there's no way you get that type of loan without this type of sovereign guarantee. Now, what does this all mean? We're borrowing money to survive, but we're paying it back over a long period. So we've got the time and space to pay it back and to wait for that ramp up to come after COVID-19. Those are the measures we took. And I can tell you, like every airline in the world, we had to turn to our shareholder, which is government. Some went to government, not even their shareholder, and we've been supported, and we will survive. And thank you to those measures.
We hope that the show went some way to explain and create greater understanding about the situation with Fiji Airways. As I said at the beginning, that is straight from the horse's mouth, from the Fiji Airways CEO, Viljoen. As you have seen in the media, the opposition continues to call for an independent inquiry for public accountability and good governance, while the government has accused them of playing politics with the situation. We will continue to follow this story. That was Simpson at 8 for the evening. Good night.